Hi, let's talk about photosynthesis. So, question, how do plants use light to make their own food? Okay, photosynthesis is the concept that glucose is used by plants as food, but unlike us that has to eat our food from somewhere else, they make their own. And that's what photosynthesis is all about. So, the idea of making glucose sugar using energy from light, that's what photosynthesis is. Pay attention to this part. Photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplast. That's the name of a cellular organelle. That's a piece of the cell. Gives it its green color if it's a plant cell. In fact, these are only found in plant cells anyway. And what they do is they are the site of this process of photosynthesis. We need to go through the process of how photosynthesis occurs. So let's begin. What do you need to make sugar? You need light, because that provides the energy. You need water, that provides the hydrogens and the oxygens that are part of the glucose formula. And you need CO2, that provides the carbons, as well as some other oxygens. So plants produce glucose and oxygen waste. For plants, oxygen is a waste. Now, they do actually use it when they actually eat the glucose they made later on. That's what they do like at night. They consume the glucose that they produce, but you can't consume it until you've made it first. So from the perspective of producing it, glucose is what you want, and then oxygen is the waste product. Oops, wrong button there. All right, now, the chemical equation for photosynthesis. 6 carbon dioxide molecules react with 6 water molecules and energy from light to produce glucose, sugar, and oxygen. Now there should just be one arrow pointing this way. I don't know why there's 2 arrows, but it is true that at night, when the plant doesn't have any sunlight, it will consume, actually even during the day too, all the time, it does at some point eat the glucose that it made, eat the glucose through the process of cellular respiration, and it will go react with 6 oxygen molecules to make water and CO2. So plants can do it both ways. We humans cannot produce glucose, but we certainly can't consume it because everything you eat either gets broken into glucose or comes out as waste. So, the reactants versus the products. As a reminder, everything on this side, especially when you have just the arrow pointing toward the right here, the reactants go on the left side, the products go on the right side. Reactants are what you start with, products are what you make. That's why it says that these are the reactants, that's why it says that these are the products. Even though reactants have to be chemicals and light's not a chemical, nonetheless one gets the idea. Alright, 2 parts to photosynthesis. Photosynthesis comes in 2 big parts. This is the light reaction. It's the idea of capturing energy in the form of ATP, and the dark reaction is using that ATP to produce the glucose. So it all goes toward making glucose. It's just light reaction, you capture the energy, dark reaction, you use it to do something. So light reaction takes place in the thylakoid membranes. Yes, be able to say where the light reaction takes place. The thylakoid membrane is inside the chloroplast. It's these things. So these membranes, membrane means like the outer envelope. So think of like the outer covering of a balloon or something. That's kind of what these are. So the outer covering is where this process takes place. Light energy is used to make this, which carries energy, and this, which carries electrons, both of which are needed to make the process occur. The dark reaction is where you take the energy you used, as well as some electrons, and use it to build sugar. It takes place in the stroma, which is the empty space surrounding these thylakoids, which is inside the chloroplast but outside the thylakoids. So it's in this empty space here. Okay, that's the stroma. The thylakoid membranes is these pancake-like things inside the chloroplast. So everything's inside the chloroplast. We're just talking different parts of the chloroplast. All right, CO2 is used to form glucose. That's right, the carbon in sugar came from the carbon in carbon dioxide. All right, so the light reaction, also called the light-dependent reaction, in a little more detail. It produces ATP, because remember, the light reaction captures energy, the dark reaction does something with it. So energy is captured in the form of ATP. The 4 steps of the light reaction. So the coloring molecule, aka pigment, chlorophyll, absorbs the light. That light excites electrons and can make this process begin. The energy is used to remove electrons from molecules. So really when it excites electrons, this captures energy and uses that energy to rip electrons out of water. That rips this water molecule apart, and the O in water becomes oxygen. That's where the source of the oxygen produced by photosynthesis. It's ripping the water molecules apart to release the oxygen. And then the electrons go to excited state. They go down this electron transport chain that pump hydrogens up here across the membrane. And then the next thing that happens is they form a concentration gradient. I just want to make sure what I'm saying matches up with here. And then they also take this molecule, add the electron here to produce this. So the electrons move through here, and they wind up being captured by this NADPH. This is an electron carrier. And so as the hydrogen ions as these electrons move through here, they power little pumps that move the hydrogen ions up here. So as the electrons flow through, more and more and more and more hydrogens are building up here. Why? Because right there, look at that. This is called ATP synthase. It produces ATP. So, I guess that's on the next slide. Okay, I guess I'll mention what's here first. So the electrons keep flowing along. Water provides fresh supply of electrons so the supply can keep going. And then this NADP keeps capturing more and more electrons to make more and more NADPHs. So you make a whole bunch of NADPHs. But like I said, as this goes, the hydrogen ions build until they start flowing through here like a waterfall. And this causes this to produce the ATP. So I did say earlier that this light-dependent reaction, which is all happening here, produces the energy carrier, or the electron carrier NADPH, and the energy carrier ATP. This is how. The electrons are released by water, go through here, pumping hydrogen ions, and they wind up being carried away by NADPH. The hydrogen ions that got pumped up here flow through this, causing this little thing to turn and produce ATP that captures energy. So this is what I was just talking about right here. Hydrogen ion pumps create a concentration gradient. That means just a bunch of hydrogens build up here. Those hydrogen ions build up and then flow through here. And then that powers the ATP synthase to produce ATP. And it does it by taking ADP and adding one more phosphate. So adenosine diphosphate becomes adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And this is saying it's sort of like all the hydrogens build up and then they flow through. And just like these little dots were turning the wheel, all those hydrogens flowing through turn this enzyme that force together ADP plus phosphorus to make ATP, the energy carrier. All right, another overview. Okay, and again, it's producing, this is the light reaction producing energy and electrons. These will go to the dark reactions. This will power the production of sugar. This will provide electrons that allow molecules to be torn apart and rearranged. That's why we have an electron carrier involved. So here's a sort of simple animation. So energy goes in, water is split, releasing electrons, also releasing oxygen. There it goes. Okay, now that also left behind hydrogen, right? The H out of the H2O. Those hydrogen ions, as those electrons flow through, they move up here. The electrons are causing the hydrogen ions to build up on one side. See that? They're powering hydrogen pumps. As they build up here, they're going to start flowing back to the other side, just like a waterfall. Let's see, yeah, there's a whole thing where it absorbs more of this photosystem 1 and 2 and all that. That's a whole other thing. But the point is, okay, look, hydrogen ions build up. They now begin to flow through like that, powering the ATP synthase, which produces ATP by taking ADP, adding a phosphate to produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And now that's the energy carrier that goes off to do its thing in the dark reactions. Now, like it says, those electrons are still there. So NADP comes, picks them up, and then combines it with a hydrogen to make NADPH, and that can also go to the dark reactions to help power those. All right, the dark reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle, does not require light. This happens 24 hours a day inside the cell. Now, look at the purpose, make glucose. It uses these two things that were made by the light reactions to power the dark reactions and to power the process of making glucose. So where in the stroma of the chloroplast? Again, the stroma is just the empty space inside the chloroplast. So this is the overview of the Calvin cycle. It takes CO2 from the atmosphere, and then it extracts electrons from NADPH, it extracts energy from ATP to rearrange these to make glucose. Now, you'll notice glucose is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. This is just carbon and oxygen here in the CO2. That's because it pulls off hydrogens from the NADPH. That's why it turns into NADP. Okay, so ATP and NADPH release energy to rearrange the carbons and electrons. Release energy and electrons necessary to rearrange the carbons and produce glucose. All right, this is the overview. So notice the light reactions take water and remove this oxygen. This hydrogen gets carried by the NADP in the form of NADPH over here. The electrons from here also get carried by NADPH over here. And the energy from the light gets carried as ATP over here to the dark reactions, aka the Calvin cycle. When it's done, when it extracts the hydrogen, that leaves just NADP, and it extracts the electron, leaving a plus part. This goes back here to get reused. When you extract energy from here, this turns into this, which is why it goes from here to here to get turned back into this again. So the light reactions in the thylakoid membrane produce the electron carriers and the ATP that carries the energy. The dark reactions take those things and use them to build sugar. Okay, so let's put these in the right place. This is a way of putting it all together as a diagram. Light reactions need water and energy, produce oxygen, and send over ATP and NADPH to the dark reactions, which take CO2 and produce C6H12O6, which is glucose sugar. The leftover ADP and NADPH go back here to get reused, and back here again. That's a cycle. It goes on forever. Okay. All right, hopefully I have everything there. All right, so hopefully that gives the right ideas. All right, and that's it. That's the big overview. Happy studies.